Welcome back to the AI Daily Brief.
Now, two quick things about today's show. One, as sometimes happens when we have an exciting new model, the main episode got a little bit long. There really are kind of two parts. The first half or so is about the background, context, and the announcement of the new Nano Banana model. And then the second half is the 7 new use cases that it opens up. Second thing to note, after recording for 40 minutes, I discovered that it had not been recording with my actual podcast mic and instead was recording directly into the laptop. However, I am in Vegas for a keynote today, and so am not able to go back and re-record the full episode. We've done our best to use a variety of tools, AI and otherwise, to make the sound quality as good as it can be, but apologies that it's a little bit lower than normal. With all that out of the way, let's dive into this very exciting new model.
Today, we are talking about the image model that has had people incredibly excited for the last couple of weeks. It is finally out. We got confirmation who it was from. And already people are discovering new use cases that were not possible, at least in the way that they are now, before this release came. It's a great reminder of the fact that we still really do live right on the horizon between possible and impossible. And that every time there's a new model, even if it's not obvious at first, there are some set of new things that move over into the realm of the possible that simply were not before. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves with that. A couple of weeks ago, a new image generation model showed up on LM Arena that was called Nano Banana. I've talked about this previously on the show. If you spend any time on AI Twitter, you've probably seen people talking about it or sharing their generations with it. The model quickly rose to the top of the leaderboard and gathered a ton of praise for its state-of-the-art performance. Now, interestingly, unlike the last few leaps in image model quality, people weren't just talking about how realistic the images were. Instead, the real standout was the model's ability to edit images. You could generate a single shot and then modify it with seemingly perfect object consistency and incredible prompt adherence. Now, this is one of those things that I think people have always imagined as what they wanted out of an AI-generated image model, but hadn't really been there yet. If you spend any time with Midjourney or the tools inside ChatGPT, you'll know that it's pretty frequently a crapshoot of trying to get the model to do what you want to do. In fact, for some, like Midjourney, I don't even recommend trying to get the model to do what you want to do. I basically recommend you winding it up, pointing it in a direction, and letting it do what it wants. Now, there have been some big updates recently. For example, Ideogram, which I use every day for thumbnails, added a new updated character consistency patch, which made a huge difference. But still, the idea of being able to take a base image and turn it into whatever you want in a way that was coherent is something that people have both wanted and simply haven't had access to. Didi Das of Menlo Ventures said, "This is the next generation of filters that we've been promised forever." In any case, once the hype started building, Google folks began winking at the crowd on X, implying that they were, in fact, the ones testing in stealth. Those hints, however, backfired, as they led many to think that the Google Pixel 10 launch last week was going to double as the Nano Banana rollout. Many were disappointed then when the event came and went with no mention of the new model. Now, in retrospect, keeping them separated makes sense. These are two very different launches for very different audiences. The Pixel 10 rollout was about selling a new AI-enabled phone to normies. And as much as it focused on some of the image features, it wasn't about advanced AI workflows, it was about how they could do things like zoom in better. In fact, although they didn't say anything about Nano Banana, some of the image generation features on that phone were interesting enough that people speculated that Google had actually put the model onto the phone without really drawing attention to it. In any case, after weeks of anticipation, Google confirmed that they were in fact the ones behind Nano Banana, and we got the full reveal. Officially, the model is called Gemini 2.5 Flash. So despite the resonance of the meme version of the name, we haven't quite escaped AI model naming convention hell just yet. The model is now available as a free preview in Google AI Studio, in the Gemini API, and in the Vertex AI platforms. Now, in terms of the features that Google showcased, the model can edit images to change backgrounds, clothing settings, basically whatever you like using a plain English prompt. The model is also capable of blending two images together, for example, combining two different character images and having them interact. One powerful way to use the model is a workflow that Google calls multi-turn editing. Once you test the model, you'll realize it can easily fall over if you ask for multiple edits at once, so it's far better to go one step at a time. Google demonstrated this feature by filling out an empty room with a bookshelf, a couch, and a coffee table, one at a time. The final feature that Google showcased was the ability to take a style or a theme from one image and apply it to a different context. They showed the model taking the pattern on a butterfly's wing and applying it to a dress. And at this point, I'm realizing that I should have given you a caveat earlier, that while all of these episodes are a little bit better using video usually, this one being about an image model is one where you're really going to benefit from going and watching it on YouTube or on Spotify. And of course, as with any new model, the company had to share the benchmarks. Logan Kilpatrick, the product lead for Google AI Studio, shared the benchmarking, which was very impressive. Nano Banana was unsurprisingly the best model on LM Arena during the testing, but the gap it opened up with rivals was frankly huge. The new model was about 17% better than the next ranked model, Flux One Context according to their ELO rankings. GPT-4o Image, the model that stormed the world with Ghibli's, was ranked slightly below Flux, suggesting, and this is something we'll talk about a little bit more in just a minute, that Google now has a big advantage over OpenAI, at least when it comes to this sort of image generation. Breaking down the categories, Nano Banana topped the rankings in character, creative, infographics, object and environment, and product recontextualization. The only category where it didn't outperform was stylization, where it fell behind GPT-4o Image and Qwen Image Edit. Now, as always, big caveats and grains of salt when it comes to benchmarks. Although frankly, in some ways, I'm more interested in the subjective user preference style of benchmarks like you get in LM Arena, as opposed to just random tests, which are A, all saturated, and B, conducted in labs by the company putting out the model and wanting it to do well in the first place. Now, the other notable technical point about this model is that it's based on Gemini 2.5 Flash. That means that it has some of the same limitations. OpenAI leaker Jimmy Apples wrote, "Very good for what it does, but Flash is a dumb model and it's annoying for complex ideas." The flip side, of course, is that the model is absurdly cheap and fast for what it does. Access through the API costs around 4 cents per image, which is a quarter of the price of GPT-4o Image on high detail settings. Now, for most of our purposes, if you are listening here, cost doesn't really matter that much at the moment due to the free preview. The architecture also means that the model inherits the reasoning features of Flash, which can be used during image generation. As you'd expect, the model has immediately taken over the discourse. X loves new model releases, and that goes double for a visual model that really hits the sweet spot for engagement. In fact, frankly, you kind of think that Elon must be fuming over there, given how hard he has tried to turn Grok's image generation capabilities into a meme recently, without getting anywhere near the viral resonance of the Nano Banana model. Pretty universally, people are incredibly impressed. Kevin Olivieri edited a series of iconic sports scenes, commenting, "Testing Gemini 2.5 Flash Image, aka Nano Banana. Standout feature, precise localized edits with context preserved. I took iconic sports photos and animeified the athletes, all while maintaining the rest of the image, lighting, etc. My favorite is the image of Jordan on his way up to dunk." AI consultant Hadi Khan made a 4-pane image of different styles of platypus, writing, "Gemini Nano generating multiple styles in the same image in parallel, one shot, one prompt, one result. Was not possible nor imaginable a couple of years ago." Princeton CS major Chrissy Cat posted, "The best thing about Gemini Image Gen is that the original inputs are preserved, no shiny cartoonification." She shared an example of using the prompt to make a rom-com movie poster with these two characters, adding Edward Cullen from Twilight and a shot of the lead from The Summer I Turned Pretty, and said, "You can just imagine what sus things people are going to make." To the extent that anyone is disappointed, it seems to be on edge cases. Prins wrote, "Testing Nano Banana today. Not impressed with anything other than some of its image editing capabilities. First, world knowledge, with the prompt picture of Shakespeare writing the famous opening line from Mark Caesar's speech at Caesar's funeral, and picture of Nabokov writing the famous line about aurochs and angels. The text it generates is slop. It doesn't have internal world knowledge." He continues though, "However, unlike ChatGPT, this model knows to keep the text facing the author. ChatGPT will often have it easily readable by the viewer instead, so it looks like the writer is writing the text upside down." As to the portrait of Nabokov himself, "Dear Nano Banana, who is this man? ChatGPT gets him perfectly." Prins ran through a series of other nitpicks, noting in particular that the model doesn't handle large quantities of text very well. However, he did point out that it perfectly handled editing a Hypnotic Spectre for Magic the Gathering to be holding a modern weapon perfectly, including all the card text. And if you've ever seen a turn 1 swamp into a dark ritual into a hippie, the version where he's carrying a massive machine gun is even more intimidating. By the way, kudos to any of you who got that reference. We'll come back at the end to some of the things that the model can't do really well yet, but it is notable that even the so-called critiques that I could find still had nice things to say about some parts of this. Now, one of the big takeaways for many is that Google is now firmly in the lead when it comes to multimodal LLMs. AI engineer Mark Kretschmann wrote, "Google is becoming the clear leader in multimodal AI. Other labs like OpenAI will have a hard time catching up. Google has the hardware and TPUs and data in YouTube advantage. I don't see anyone keeping up with Google in the near future." Investor Mark Turk wrote, "Somehow Google went from being perceived as an AI loser a year or two ago to releasing the most exciting AI products in 2025. Veo 3, Genie 3, and now Banana, aka Gemini 2.5 Flash Image." So let's talk now about 7 new use cases that Nano Banana opens up. Like I said at the beginning, every time we get a new model, it tips into reality some set of use cases that were not possible before. Sometimes the change is very small and incremental. Sometimes it's a little bit more dramatic. The first thing that jumped to most people's mind when it came to Nano Banana was that this model absolutely kills Photoshop. It is, of course, not the first model that's been capable of editing images, but it's the first one that has this level of quality and consistency. Ethan Mollick writes, "It's impressive, crossing a threshold that goes beyond toy, although it's a pretty fun toy too." And indeed, if you had to summarize the general sentiment, outside, of course, the hype boys who are just going to say, this changes everything no matter what was released, this notion that there has been a precipice into professional possibility crossed seems to be where a lot of people are. One of the funniest posts that I saw was from AI writer Andrei Burkov, who basically tried to do a takedown, mostly seeming annoyed at those quote-unquote AI influencers who were screaming that this was a wild model. He shared a grainy black and white photo and said, transform this black and white photo into a color photo where the top half of my body is visible and I'm in a nice office background wearing something casual but looking professional, not a suit. And he said, they scream that the model perfectly preserves your face while changing everything around it. I tested it and what they say is a lie. The model has clear problems with removing the background. The person with a changed background looks photoshopped into it. I don't know, man. Yes, the resulting generated image looks photoshopped. It doesn't have the sort of fidelity to reality that some of the other examples that we've seen are. But frankly, given that Andrei gave it an incredibly grainy black and white picture of his face and didn't ask it to preserve that style, it does a pretty impressive job. And certainly to the extent that we are talking about whether or not this displaces taking 15 to 30 minutes in Photoshop to do something, or even much longer when it comes to a comprehensive thing like this, you gotta think that it's gonna challenge those traditional methodologies. Sticking with the theme of this model killing entire categories of products, our next use case that this enables is about try-on startups, where basically every single one of them is now faced with a very big problem. This model can natively do what those apps have been stringing together prompts and frameworks to achieve. Which is not to say that the tweaks that they can do to improve the process or the UX they put around it to make it more performant for a specific professional use case can't carry them. But this is a feature that's now going to show up in a native Google app for free by the end of the year. Writes AI for Success, RIP 379 startups. He tested the feature by placing a ChatGPT shirt on Sam Altman and noticed the incredible attention to detail, saying, I can't believe it replaced the entire t-shirt and still kept that tiny microphone intact from the original image. Now, of course, this is a much broader trend that we've been seeing ever since the beginning of ChatGPT's release. Capabilities that once required a ton of scaffolding are just getting baked into foundation models. And of course, in this particular case, what that means is that this use case is obviously going to become rapidly commoditized and just total table stakes when it comes to basically any sort of shopping platform. AI Warper wrote, hard to find motivation to build anything right now when Nano Banana will just obliterate you in a week or two. This is another great reminder of what Sam Altman was talking about when he said that the best builders will not be building in directions where advancements in the foundation models upend their model, but instead where new updates in the underlying models actually improve what they're doing. Next use case is one that people have been exploring again ever since the early days of Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. Restoring old photos isn't necessarily a hyper-commercial use case, but it is beloved, and Nano Banana really takes it to the next level. Rodrigo Brissain, a professional photographer and consultant at Freepik, wrote, nothing has ever been like this before. I spent countless hours working on photo restoration and colorization solutions long before AI was a thing. Nothing compares to this. Truly remarkable. He ran through a series of incredibly impressive examples which are worth checking out if you're interested in this niche. One of my favorites was this classic photo of Winston Churchill. The model not only nailed a realistic colorization, but it also managed to keep the brooding intensity of the photo based on its choice of lighting and saturation. In other words, the point isn't just that colorization is now possible when it wasn't before. It's that we're now at the point where photo restoration can be a one-click feature with near-perfect results. Now, so far, these examples have all been about doing things that were already possible 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper, and 10 times better. Where things start to require a little more imagination is when we start to look at features that simply were not possible before. Nano Banana inherits Gemini's world understanding, so it has a strong understanding of real-world facts it can use in its generation. Bilawal Sidhu writes, since Nano Banana has Gemini's world knowledge, you can just upload screenshots of the real world and ask it to annotate stuff for you. He included his prompt, you're a location-based AR experience generator. Highlight the point of interest in this image and annotate relevant information about it. The outputs were various San Francisco landmarks, including the Ferry Building, the Transamerica Pyramid, and the Palace of the Fine Arts, all annotated with key stats. There also seems to be a kind of world model embedded in the training as well. This makes the model state-of-the-art in doing perspective transitions. Peter Levels demonstrated the model flipping the perspective on a first-person image of a person holding a cup to show the man lying in bed with the cup. He also showed that the model can take an image of a face and generate a full body image from every possible perspective. When pushed to the limits, this capability is unlike anything we've seen before. Benjamin DeCracker, a former XAI engineer, generated an image of a city street. Nano Banana was then able to change the perspective to a top-down view and point to the location and orientation of the cameraman from the first photo. Now, the specific ways in which people will use this, I'm not totally sure, but it's such a powerful capability, it's hard not to imagine that people will find ways to take advantage of it, and pretty quickly. Moving on to our fifth use case, one of the implications of having world knowledge is the capability to think about 3D shapes. Linus Eckenstam noted that Nano Banana is capable of generating really capable 3D meshes. He commented, "Yeah, we were already there. There are many image to 3D models. What I like here is if we can accurately allow for multiple images of an object to be uploaded, we have more control over the final output." Now, it should also be noted that this is the first image to 3D mesh model that combines reasoning and prompt adherence to the level that Gemini Flash is capable of. One obvious use for this is generating game assets, although there doesn't seem to be an ability to export meshes so far. For the moment, the best you can do is combine the image generations with other tools to create 3D assets for games and animations. Still, the incredible consistency means you can generate a huge variety of poses, variations, and angles, which makes a big difference for this actual production-style use case. Here's another wild example, taking a pretty low-quality image of a building at night and turning it into a production-quality isometric game asset. Didi Das again at Menlo Ventures wrote, "The best use case I heard so far is taking objects out of pictures and creating 3D models from them for games. Anything from a movie can be put into a game." Now, one of the interesting things that popped up looking at all these use cases was the extent to which Nano Banana is just taking out entire workflows. Rather than just an edit here or there, some people are using the model multiple times to carry their ideas all the way through. A filmmaker called Kevin shared his use of Nano Banana to block out a scene, fiddle with elements, and then run it through an image-to-video model. He wrote, "I've been using Nano Banana, or Gemini 2.5 Flash Image as it's called, quite a lot over the weekend. It's the best way for me to achieve planned shots in a more direct and faster manner with greater control." Others demonstrated the workflow for product photos. Because the model can do perspective changes, text and context shift so easily that you can transform a single product shot into as many different ones as you need. Nathan Snell, an AI retention marketing specialist, posted, "Gemini 2.5 Flash Image is really good. One-shot variation of a hero. This might be the breakthrough we were waiting for to get the statics over the line. One of the big issues with AI product images so far has been generating natural-looking shots of the product in someone's hand or of a person wearing it, but the improvement with Nano Banana is a big jump up in that area." The same is true for other applications outside advertising. VFX artist Paige Piskin noted that you can now take one photo of a model and generate an entire photo shoot. Flowers commented on how big these changes could be, writing, "AI image generation isn't yet able to replace fashion and editorial photographers and retouchers because resolution, detail, body coherence, and control just aren't there yet in production quality. But the first tool that nails this will wipe out not one job, but 10 at once. Photographer, creative director, art director, stylist, hair, makeup model, retoucher, producer, set designer, all gone. AI images are 1,000 to 5,000 times cheaper. That's the thing with AI. Your job might be safe for now, but when it hits, it takes your whole industry with it." Now, of course, we don't actually know how this is going to play out, and two things can be true at once. On the one hand, directionally, it seems like there is some amount of inevitability to what Flowers is saying there. The cost differential is going to mean that for many types of photo shoot use cases, AI is just going to become the default option. However, what we don't know yet is 1, what sort of skills are going to be necessary to work with the AI. We have a tendency when a new model shows up to share all of the random generations of random people and be so impressed with what it can do, without remembering that when it comes to actual professional use cases that go into production, there's going to be a wild gap between the people who are actually good at this, good enough to pay to do it, and those who are just doing it for fun. In other words, just because the floor comes up for everyone in terms of their ability to create, it doesn't mean that the ceiling comes down, and companies are always going to want to go with people who can use it at that ceiling level. The second thing is we don't know how many photo shoots, to continue with this example right now, are not happening because of cost. In other words, it's really hard to predict anything other than the simple fact that things will change. Now, our last of 7 new use cases is really more of a combination than an individual one on its own. When you bring all of these capabilities together and combine them with other tools, it creates for just some wild new possibilities. One of the big use cases for GPT-4o Image when it was released, for example, was making infographics and posters. Given that it was one of the first models that did a good job on text and was attached to a foundation LLM, it meant that it had enough general knowledge to create believable infographics and the actual ability to do so. Moving back to Nano Banana, AI educator Zane Shaw posted, "Wow, I asked Gemini 2.5 Image, aka Nano Banana, for interleaved text and images using TTS to narrate the text, animated the images, And in minutes, I had this whole animated explainer video full of complex 3D graphics and diagrams explaining the science end to end. He showed a short video explaining how water freezes complete with molecule animations. Now, obviously that isn't strictly about Nano Banana, but it shows how this big improvement in image gen quality can be stitched together with various other tools to produce professional quality work. Now, I should point out that we're at the stage with this model where mostly people are just focused on discovering what it does really well. It won't be long before we also find out where its limitations are. AI consultant Nufar Gaspar, for example, ran it through a set of 3 knowledge worker tasks: infographic manipulation and data editing, a slide visual fix and edit, and a complex infographic generation. And while it did better than many previous models, she still found that some of the text generation was problematic. She wrote, "Bottom line, with many text captions, the model struggles. It's better to generate blank placeholders and add the text in another app." So yes, even with all this excitement, the Banana is still not perfect yet, but overall, hard not to be excited about this new update. I certainly can't wait to dig in there and try things out. For now, though, that's going to do it for today's AI Daily Brief. Appreciate you listening or watching as always, and until next time, peace.